One of you guys want to set this up a little bit of background?
Do you want to go first, Russell, or should I?
Matt, you can go ahead, and then I'll I'll try to fill things out if I can.
Sure. I should say, well, just to begin with, I spent an awful lot of time reading both of these authors. Personally, I tend to be a bigger fan of Chomsky than I am of Foucault, in no small part because I think his linguistic theories are revolutionary in their implications, and also because I think I'm a kind of creamy, dreamy rationalist at heart. So that's kind of where on the spectrum I end up lying. On the other hand, I do think that there are substantial problems with the approach that Chomsky sometimes takes to politics, which is to dissociate it from things like broader ideological critique, appeals to affect, and so on and so forth. And that's where I think Foucault is a lot stronger in analyzing the different ways various forms of subjectivity can be constituted, the discourses that they tend to involve themselves in, and all the stuff that I'm sure that will come up here. I watched this debate a long, long time ago, I should say. I think it must have been in like the second or third year of my undergraduate degree. And one of my professors pointed out that you can also really see the difference in academic cultures between France and the United States by looking at them. Because you saw Chomsky, and he was dressed in a nice enough suit, and he's kind of there looking a bit like a tweedy, MIT, Harvard type dude. But then there was Michel Foucault, who looked like he was just made for TV. You know what I mean? The coiffed head, the elegant gestures, speaking very pointedly about everything. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? He's like, well, it's the difference between academics in France and academics in the United States. Academics in the United States through the Vietnam War, pretty much widely hated. Academics in France are basically mini celebrities. And no one was a bigger one than Foucault at that time. And I was like, oh, Jesus, I'd like the fucking celebrity treatment at one point, roll out the red carpet.
Yeah, I think I'm coming from it. I don't want to say a plague on both of their houses, because I actually really find useful and I mean, in some instances, revolutionary thought in both of them. I don't know if I would pick one over the other, but coming more from the continental side of things myself, my first impulse is almost to side with Foucault, but then also as somebody who works in psychoanalysis, Marxism, despite I come from literary studies, and the past 30 years or longer has been like the main paradigm has been heavily Foucauldian. And so to have gone through graduate school in literary studies anytime before 2010, you would have been it varies from program to program, but you would have been steeped in this sort of Foucauldian historicism. Having said that, so I think theoretically I'm actually more aligned with Foucault, even though I have a lot of problems with him, but politically, and we'll see this, I think that ultimately politically I'm much more closely aligned with Chomsky. So it's a weird position where theoretically I think Foucault has a bit of the upper hand, but politically I think that even though Foucault says that he is a leftist, I think that Foucault has been in large part, or maybe like Foucauldianism has been in large part responsible for a sort of attenuation of not so much political commitment, but of focus on the political as such, especially in the academy over the past like 30, 40 years. So that's sort of my preamble about this.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, I just wanted to say one of the unfortunate realities of the situation is that we've had decades and decades of Chomsky where we can kind of mince his political positions, get a good sense of how they've evolved and changed over time. I really think the best was yet to come for Foucault when he tragically passed away far too young, especially because I think the kind of left Nietzschean expressivism that you really find in his later works, where he starts to talk about how it is that, we can engage in projects of self-creation, was very interesting. Sadly, he passed away before he ever really gave us a systematic work in the vein of that project. So we have to kind of fill in the blanks there.
Yeah. I think actually a lot of what both of you said resonates with me. I think Chomsky, Chomsky is certainly somebody who politically, I think is right about just about everything. I did certainly I think all of the most important topics that he's tackled, from his sort of bread and butter stuff about the day-to-day evils of capitalism and imperialism to things that are maybe a little bit further out on the edge, like his defense, even within the left, of free speech. I think most of my critique of Chomsky politically isn't about what he does say, but about what he doesn't say, about the things that I think are important that are left out of his projects. And Foucault, yeah, I think there's some ambiguity there politically, because certainly there were times in his life when he was he was embracing a very radical left kind of message. I think there's some ambiguities about that, especially later in his career, and I do agree with some of what Russ says about the way that his influence has not always been benign, especially in academia.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly as far as philosophical style, I've already admitted to be, well, actually, let's put it this way: to combine the question of philosophical style with what Matt brought up originally about personal style. I think that I think about this often, that like I'm in the slightly odd position as somebody who does still have a day job as an academic, that I really, I'm an analytic philosophy nerd, as I mentioned earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I really like that stuff. But I absolutely hate most academic philosophers, because most of them are like annoying dweebs who prefer Elizabeth Warren to Bernie Sanders, and and are obsessed with civility and are woke in exactly the wrong ways, and and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So there are like 10 people who do this, who actually like, and I'll just leave it at that, so people can guess about whether they're in the 10. So I think certainly in terms of style of doing philosophy, I mean, obviously Chomsky is much closer to where I come from. But I'll just say this before we start. Something that has always made me laugh since learning it is that apparently Chomsky, as far as I know, being a square, was paid in money for this debate, whereas Foucault demanded that the organizers pay him in hash, and so then for a while afterwards, every time that he and his friends would smoke it, they'd say, "Hey, it's time to break out the Chomsky hash."
That's great. I didn't know that.
All right, let's start it up.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome at the fourth debate of the International Philosophers Project. Tonight's debaters are Mr. Michel Foucault, the Collège de France, and Mr. Noam Chomsky of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Both philosophers have points in common and points of difference. Perhaps the best way to compare both philosophers is to look at them as mountain diggers working at the opposite side of the same mountains with different tools, without knowing even if they are working in each other's direction. All learning concerning man, ranging from history to linguistics and psychology, are faced with the question whether in the last instance we are the product of all kinds of external factors, or if in spite of our differences, we have something we could call a common human nature by which we can call each other human beings. So my first question is to Mr. Chomsky, because you, Mr. Chomsky, employ often the concept.
Are they drinking orange juice?
And even in this connection, you are using terms
Screwdrivers?
like
Is that what those are?
Yeah, probably more likely. Yeah.
Which arguments can you derive from linguistics in order to give such a central position to this notion of human nature?
Well, let me begin in a slightly technical way. A person who's interested in studying language is faced with a very definite empirical problem. He's faced with an organism, a mature, let's say adult speaker, who has somehow acquired an amazing range of abilities which enable him in particular to say what he means, to understand what people say to him, to do this in a fashion that I think it's proper to call highly creative. Now, the person who's acquired this intricate and highly articulated and organized collection of abilities, the collection of abilities that we call knowing a language, that person has been exposed to a certain experience. He has been presented in the course of his lifetime with a certain amount of data, of direct experience with the language. And we can investigate the data that's available to this person. And having done so, in principle, we're faced with a very clear and a reasonably clear and well delineated scientific problem, namely the problem of accounting for the gap between the really quite small quantity of data, small and rather degenerate quantity of data that's presented to the person, to the child, and the very highly articulated, highly systematic, profoundly organized resulting knowledge that he somehow derives from this data. Furthermore, even more remarkable, we notice that in a wide range of languages, in fact, all that have been studied seriously, there are remarkable limitations on the kinds of system that emerge from the very different kinds of experience to which people are exposed. Well, there's only one possible explanation for it in a what one can say in a rather schematic fashion for this remarkable phenomenon, namely the assumption that the individual himself contributes a good deal, an overwhelming part, in fact, of the general schematic structure and perhaps even of the specific content of the knowledge that he ultimately derives from this very scattered and limited experience. That is, to put it rather loosely, the child must begin with the knowledge, certainly not with the knowledge that he's hearing English or Dutch or French or something else, but he does start with the knowledge that he's hearing a human language of a very narrow and explicit type that permits a very small range of variation. And it's because he begins with that highly organized and very restrictive schematism that he's able to make the huge leap from scattered and degenerate data to highly organized knowledge. And I would claim then that this instinctive knowledge, if you like, this schematism that makes it possible to derive complex and intricate knowledge on the basis of very partial data, is one fundamental constituent of human nature. But then I assume that in other domains of human intelligence and other domains of human cognition and even behavior, something of the same sort must be true. Well, the collection of this mass of innate schematisms, innate organizing principles, which guides our social and intellectual and individual behavior, that's what I mean referred to by the concept of human nature.
Well, Mr. Foucault, if I'm thinking at your books like Histoire de la Folie...
I was going to say, I do love the way that he articulates these kind of positions in a very technical language that's nonetheless extremely accessible and relatively clear to a lay audience. He does this in his books on the subject also, like his book on human nature that came out, I think, just like 3 or 4 years ago. Same kind of thing.
Yeah,
I like the shot of the raft, the woman in the rafters. What the camera guy was making his money on this one.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it gives you a sense of how packed this is. Yeah, no, I like that too about Chomsky, that there's like even as he's saying that, like even as part of me is like, okay, sure. I mean, is this exactly the relevant sense of human nature or whatever? But I mean, I think there's real virtue in that because, by like really nailing it down like that. All right, well, if it's not right, you could at least explain why not, so it's at least very clear what the starting point is.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not like his linguistic program hasn't evolved over time, which is another feature of it that I quite admire, actually. Like he dropped a lot of the stuff about deep and surface grammars that was extremely popular in the 1970s iteration and adopted what was called later the minimalist program in reaction to some criticisms by evolutionary biologists and evolutionary linguistics, while still kind of holding true to the rationalist core of his thinking. So I do like that, right? Like he's a pretty adaptable guy when it comes to his approach to linguistics. Yeah,
I mean, I think I've seen him say that, that basically, like, this isn't the exact quote, but, something along the lines of, look, like the things I'm saying politically aren't really going to change very much. I was against imperialist wars. I'm going to be against imperialist wars.
Yeah.
But I would see it as an intellectual failure if what I was saying about linguistics and cognitive science was the same in 10 years.
Yeah, and I know a number of people have asked him, like, what's the connection between your scientific and philosophical work on generative grammar and your politics? And sometimes he says there's absolutely no relation between the two. I wear two different hats. One where I'm effectively a kind of philosophical scientist or linguist or whatever it happens to be, the other where I'm a political commentator. But in some other interviews, he suggests that there is a relation between the two, in the sense that he's committed to an enlightenment project, fundamentally, right, mature enlightenment project, where reason and human creativity can be used adaptively to solve fundamental political problems, and that societies as they are right now are insufficiently free to allow us to use our complicated cognitive hardware to actually resolve a lot of the difficulties that we face in a constructive manner, which is why we need to see some very profound changes. And I kind of like it like that, in the sense that he's very overtly aligning himself with historical project, where I think that I think actually has a lot of gas left in the tank, and he's not afraid to make that kind of association without kind of falling into the kind of cheesy enlightenism that you see with people like Steven Pinker and so on.
Fair enough. Let's watch.
I just like that he's showing some leg. I mean, he's got to compete with the Frenchman here, and so he's going to be a little risque for Chomsky, frankly. No, really. Once we start getting into, I'll have more substantive things to say. But he went straight for that orange juice though, as well. I mean, yeah. And I'd love to know if that is just orange juice or not, but who knows?